On Friday, a judge in Texas, a federal judge appointed by George W. Bush way back in the day, struck down the entire Affordable Care Act, saying that everything about this legislation is now unconstitutional. And I say now unconstitutional because that plays a big part in the ruling, which I will get to and dissect and completely debunk in just a moment. But first and foremost, obviously people started freaking out when this happened. You know, we've got 20 million people in the United States who stand to lose their health insurance if this law is struck down and done away with. So those people have absolutely every right to be concerned. Every American has a right to be concerned right now. But I promise you, it's not as bad as you think. The sky is in fact not falling after this one corporatist hack Republican judge made this horrible ruling. So let's get into the ruling. Technically, this ruling actually starts with a ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2012 when they ruled that yes, the Affordable Care Act is constitutional because Congress has the authority to fine people through the tax code. It is part of Congress's tax powers, and therefore this legislation is constitutional. They have the authority to do that. Last year, when the Republicans passed their tax cut package, they zeroed out the tax penalty for not having health insurance. And that phrase is important. They zeroed out. And it's that phrase alone that this judge in Texas now said, you know what? There's no tax penalty anymore, so it's not Congress's tax power. So therefore, the whole thing is unconstitutional if I'm basing my ruling on what the Supreme Court said was constitutional about it. That piece is no longer there, so it's unconstitutional. The problem is that this judge is going to face, and every other court along the way is probably going to strike down his ruling because he's a moron, the tax is still there. It's still a part of the tax code. It's just that it's zeroed out. So the tax penalty that you pay for not having health insurance is $0. But you still have to tell them you don't have insurance. And then they assess a $0 penalty on you. What this judge failed to do in the ruling, and this is why it will be struck down by every other court because his reasoning was unsound, he didn't count zero as a number. And yes, it is. If it is still in the tax code, which it is, because they didn't repeal that part of the law and destroy it, they just reduced the penalty to zero, the penalty still exists. Therefore, it is still a part of the tax powers of Congress, and therefore, by the Supreme Court's own ruling, still constitutional. Judges later on the appellate line are going to have to determine whether or not they consider zero to be a number. And it is, in terms of a fine. Because think about it this way. You know, if you committed a crime, and then the prosecutors say, yes, he committed the crime, Paul Manafort's a great example, but we're going to recommend no jail time. So he doesn't have to go to jail. This is over for you. Okay, well, you still did the crime, still on your record. It still shows up. You just pay a zero penalty. That's the exact same situation we're looking at here with what this judge ruled. The penalty still exists. And at any given point, Congress could raise the penalty again because they still have that power. They wouldn't have to draft a new amendment to the law. They wouldn't have to change the existing Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, in any way. All they have to do is raise the tax penalty once again. And that is why what this judge did was unconstitutional. But being a good little corporate stooge judge, as George W. Bush put it throughout this country, he decided to strike it down because he didn't know any better. Now, I hope that has eased some people's fears. And it would alleviate those fears 100% had we not let Republicans pack the courts in this country for decades. Any decent, non-partial jurist sitting on a federal bench in this country would rule that zero is a number, the tax penalty does still exist even if it's zeroed out, and therefore the Affordable Care Act is constitutional. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those left. I mean, Donald Trump has appointed almost, 100 total judges to benches across this country in the last 2 years? So yeah, it could be in trouble based on those numbers. He's got 2 idiots that he's put on the Supreme Court. That could be a problem. But if it happens that way, it's not because they looked at it and said, yes, this is unconstitutional. It's because these judges are proving that they are nothing more than corporate partisan hacks who just happen to be appointed to cushy lifetime positions. There is nothing sound about the way this judge ruled last week. His argument does not stand. His logic is 100% flawed. And hopefully, the judges who look at this along the appellate line and eventually the Supreme Court agree that 0 is a number. And because the tax law, the Affordable Care Act law itself did not change, nothing changed about Congress's taxation power. They just reduced the fine to 0.